I, juror number 6, hereby state the following as true and accurate. On May 22, 2012, I was chosen as a juror in the case of People v. Jaylen Noble. On June 1, 2012, I began deliberations with the other jurors. I felt at the onset of the deliberations that Mr. Noble was not guilty of all of the charges because the prosecution did not meet their burden of proof. By the end of the deliberations, I still had a reasonable doubt and wanted to vote not guilty on all the charges. But instead, I agreed to go along with everyone else and sign the guilty verdicts. In part, I caved in due to the enormous pressure and uncomfortable nature of the deliberations, but also because the lawyer and others continued to tell me that I did not have a reasonable doubt. The lawyer on the jury and the others told me that my reasonable doubts were not reasonable and were simply speculative. I was told that believing an alternate suspect could have committed the crimes was not a reasonable doubt, but was just speculative, because the alternate suspects were not charged and were not witnesses. In other words, I was told that unless we heard from the alternate suspects on the stand, I could not use them as basis for reasonable doubt because that would be speculative. I came to believe that since the lawyer on the jury was an attorney, that he must understand the definition of reasonable doubt more than I did. This belief was exasperated by the fact that I was told over and over that I just didn't get it, and was made to feel as if I was too stupid to understand. All of the jurors focused on the part of the reasonable doubt instruction that instructed us that doubt could not be speculation, and whenever I raised one of my reasonable doubts, they would respond that my doubt was speculation. Because the lawyer on the jury and the others continued to tell me over and over that I did not understand what reasonable doubts were, and that I was wrong and could not understand it, I began to believe that maybe I was wrong. The lawyer and other juror kept saying to me, "Just because you feel this way doesn't make it a reasonable doubt." Everyone was saying this. But what the lawyer said weighed on me more heavily. I suggested asking the judge what reasonable doubt was, but one lady and the lawyer said she will just refer back to the definition. The definition of reasonable doubt we were given was open to interpretation. I remember I felt that the testimony of one witness was not credible. In the trial, I believe that Reed, Milton, and Fisher's testimony was not true. I believed Mr. Noble's family over the snitch witnesses. I also have reasonable doubt because it could have been Denzel Fisher. I felt that it could have been Aaron Smith too, but when I brought this up, the other jurors were angry. They told me again this wasn't reasonable doubt. The lawyer said in this case that there was no evidence of the alternate suspect. He told me there was no evidence because the alternate suspect never testified. He said that because there is no evidence, you cannot use that for reasonable doubt. The other jurors kept saying that my doubts weren't reasonable. By the end of the 2.5 days, people were upset. There was pressure to come to a resolution. It was very stressful and I was very upset by everything. Everyone was constantly complaining. They told me over and over that I didn't understand the definition of reasonable doubt. But I had doubts about the whole thing. It was me versus them the whole time. I felt like they hated me. They continued to yell at me, saying things like, "You're never going to get it. Everyone else believes he's guilty, and you are the one that's wrong." They were very condescending and implied that I was simply stupid. Some of the other jurors were outwardly upset with me, yelling at me and telling me it was my fault that we were stuck here. As time went on, several jurors refused to deliberate further. They said that they did not want to go through it again because she's never going to get it. Jurors repeatedly complained that this was taking too long, that they were worried they would be stuck there forever, or that they had to go get to a verdict and get it over with because they had a trip coming up, had children to get home to, or had important work that they were missing. I felt a ton of pressure on me because it was clear that they blamed me for being there day after day. Some jurors would speak to me in an aggressive manner, talk over me, and would sigh when I would continue to state my opinions. Shortly after beginning deliberations on Friday, June 2nd, 2012, I asked the judge's clerk what would happen if we could not come to an agreement on a verdict. The clerk responded that she could not answer those kinds of questions, just general questions such as the location of the bathroom. At that point, I believed we would never come to an agreement. The other jurors were very upset they would have to come back to deliberate on Monday. The judge told the jury on several occasions that they would not have to come back after Friday. I felt that the other jurors were angry with me for making them come back. Every time I stated that we should tell the judge that we could not agree on a verdict, several jurors, including one female juror in particular, would state, "No, no, 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 we are not going to tell the judge that. If we do, we will all just get yelled at and then have to stay here for another week." I wanted to know what we will do with a hung jury, and other jurors told me that if we go out, then the judge will yell at you and make you go back for another week. I was made to understand that a hung jury meant all the same jurors had to stay and continue deliberating. There was one woman on the jury who had jury duty 3 prior times who talked about this. If I was the reason for a hung jury, everyone would have been so upset with me. When I would respond to their anger or their refusal to talk to me, I would suggest that we should tell the judge that we cannot agree on a verdict. Everyone would respond that they didn't want to do that and discussed how we would get yelled at by the judge. Again, they just kept saying they would have to keep coming back, and so I felt extra pressure to just agree with them. In addition, the judge told the jury several times that they would not have to come back after Friday. So when the deliberations continued into Tuesday of the following week, the pressure became much more intense. After 2.5 days of deliberating, I firmly believe I had a reasonable doubt. I believe that another juror felt this way too, but was pressured early on to change her vote. Eventually, I was persuaded because the other jurors thought my doubt was not reasonable. I felt I had no choice but to vote guilty. Immediately, I regretted my decision. I began to think the other jurors, and the lawyer in particular, lied to me, and I did have a reasonable doubt. I think the other woman on the jury regretted it too. I do not believe things would have ended the way they did without all of the pressure and the lawyer on the jury telling me my doubts were not reasonable.
Thank you.